So here I go again, destroying my chances to please the YouTube algorithm. But I can't help it. I have to share the Christian content too. Oh well, I'm very excited to share with you Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. Today we are diving into the first chapter of Book 1. In it, C.S. Lewis makes a bold claim. He says that there is a universal moral law that all people everywhere recognize, and yet constantly break. In this first chapter, he isn't arguing for Christianity just yet, but he's laying the groundwork by exploring our shared sense of right and wrong. Let's jump in.
Everyone has heard people quarreling. Sometimes it sounds funny, and sometimes it sounds merely unpleasant. But however it sounds, I believe we can learn something very important from listening to the kind of things they say. They say things like this: "How'd you like it if anyone did the same to you? That's my seat. I was there first. Leave him alone. He isn't doing you any harm. Why should you shove in first? Give me a bit of your orange. I gave you a bit of mine. Come on, you promised." People say things like that every day. Educated people as well as uneducated, and children as well as grown-ups. Now, what interests me about all these remarks is that the man who makes them is not merely saying that the other man's behavior does not happen to please him. He is appealing to some kind of standard of behavior which he expects the other man to know about. And the other man very seldom replies, "To hell with your standard." Nearly always he tries to make out that what he has been doing does not really go against the standard, or that if it does, there is some special excuse. He pretends there is some special reason in this particular case why the person who took the seat first should not keep it, or that things were quite different when he was given the bite of orange, or that something has turned up which lets him off keeping his promise. It looks, in fact, very much as if both parties had in mind some kind of law or rule of fair play, or decent behavior, or morality, or whatever you like to call it, about which they really agreed. And they have. If they had not, they might of course fight like animals, but they could not quarrel in the human sense of the word. Quarreling means trying to show that the other man is in the wrong, and there would be no sense in trying to do that unless you and he had some sort of agreement as to what right and wrong are. Just as there would be no sense in saying that a footballer had committed a foul unless there was some agreement about the rules of football.
Lewis's argument here is that we all have this sense that there is an external moral standard that we're supposed to live up to. His evidence for this is all these arguments that we have about behavior. We are always appealing to an external, universal standard of what's right and wrong. We don't just say, "I dislike what you did." We say, "You shouldn't have done that." No one denies that standard. When anyone defends themselves, they appeal to that same standard. They just argue that they didn't break it because of some particularity in the circumstances. Animals win arguments with exhibitions of some type of superiority or an actual battle. We humans try to show the other person why they are wrong, according to that standard. So I'm reading this, and I'm saying to myself, this isn't how it is nowadays. I've often heard counselors and parents train their charges to avoid saying things like, "That was wrong." Instead, we're supposed to say, "When you did that, I felt such and such a way." This sounds to me like our emotions are the final standard of moral behavior. Our culture is definitely all about emotions. But then I did some more thinking. Even in our modern moral context, we aren't actually appealing to feelings, but to a real standard beyond our feelings, to the law of human nature that we expect others to recognize. Lewis doesn't address modern therapy language directly, of course, but the rest of Book 1 will show why grounding morality in feelings can't carry the weight that we put on it.
Now, this law or rule about right and wrong used to be called the law of nature. Nowadays, when we talk about the laws of nature, we usually mean things like gravitation, or heredity, or the laws of chemistry. But when the older thinkers called the law of right and wrong the law of nature, they really meant the law of human nature. The idea was that just as all bodies are governed by the law of gravitation and organisms by biological laws, so the creature called man also had his law, with this great difference, that a body could not choose whether it obeyed the laws of gravitation or not, but a man could choose either to obey the law of human nature or to disobey it. We may put this in another way. Each man is at every moment subjected to several different sets of law, but there is only one of these which he is free to disobey. As a body, he is subjected to gravitation and cannot disobey it. If you leave him unsupported in midair, he has no more choice about falling than a stone has. As an organism, he is subjected to various biological laws, which he cannot disobey any more than an animal can. That is, he cannot disobey those laws which he shares with other things. But the law which is peculiar to his human nature, the law that he does not share with animals or vegetables or inorganic things, is the one that he can disobey if he chooses.
Lewis's point in this passage is that the law of human nature, the moral law, is fundamentally different from the physical laws that govern everything else in the universe. Every created thing must obey the physical laws. A coconut must obey the law of gravity, the fruit fly, the laws of heredity, the water bear, the laws of chemistry. And humans too have no choice but to obey all these physical laws. But only human beings are required to obey the moral law, all the laws about what ought to be. And we can choose to disobey them. This shows that there is something different about human beings. We are the only creatures that can choose whether to obey the law that is distinctive to our nature. Physical laws describe what bodies and organisms always do. The moral law describes what humans ought to do, even when they don't. What Lewis is getting at becomes even clearer when we look at our own culture now. We tend to treat human beings as if we were only governed by the same forces that govern everything else: genetics, psychology, environment, brain chemistry. In other words, today we want to explain human behavior in terms of causes, not choices. That we choose means that we are more than just physical processes.
This law was called the law of nature because people thought that everyone knew it by nature and did not need to be taught it. They did not mean, of course, that you might not find an odd individual here and there who did not know it, just as you find people who are colorblind or have no ear for a tune. But taking the race as a whole, they thought that the human idea of decent behavior was obvious to everyone, and I believe they were right. If they were not, then all the things we said about the war were nonsense. What is the sense of saying the enemy were in the wrong unless right is a real thing, which the Nazis at bottom knew as well as we did and ought to have practiced? If they had had no notion of what we meant by right, then, though we might still have to fight them, we could no more have blamed them for that than for the color of their hair.
We used to call moral law the law of nature because, except on rare occasions, everyone understood what was right and what was wrong according to that external standard of decent behavior. At the time Lewis wrote this, the atrocities of the Nazis were widely known, and everybody spoke of them as wrong. Lewis is saying that you can only declare the Nazis wrong if there is a real objective standard of right and wrong that both we and the Nazis were aware of, at least in principle. Without that standard, it would be meaningless to call it wrong.
I know that some people say the idea of a law of nature or decent behavior known to all men is unsound, because different civilizations and different ages have quite different moralities. But this is not true. There have been differences between their moralities, but these have never amounted to anything like a total difference. If anyone will take the trouble to compare the moral teachings of, say, the ancient Egyptians, Babylonians, Hindus, Chinese, Greeks, and Romans, what will really strike him will be how very like they are to each other and to our own. Some of the evidence for this I have put together in the appendix of another book called The Abolition of Man. But for our present purpose, I need only to ask the reader to think what a total different morality would mean. Think of a country where people were admired for running away in battle, or where a man felt proud of double-crossing all the people who had been kindest to him. You might just as well try to imagine a country where 2 and 2 make 5. Men have differed in regards to what people ought to be unselfish to, whether it was only your own family, or your fellow countrymen, or everyone, but they have always agreed that you ought not to put yourself first. Selfishness has never been admired. Men have differed as to whether you should have 1 wife or 4, but they have always agreed that you must not simply have any woman you liked.
There are those who say that there is no such thing as a universal moral code. They argue that what one culture says is wrong, another culture says is right. But Lewis argues that this is not the case. In an appendix of his book, The Abolition of Man, Lewis goes into a little more detail about the universal moral intuitions that is shared across cultures. This is a boiled-down list to give you an idea of what he's talking about. These are the foundational oughts that every society assumes. In our postmodern culture, we are very resistant to the idea of anything being universal. So you might find a lot of people who resist the idea of an external objective law. But Lewis has observed something very interesting.
But the most remarkable thing is this. Whenever you find a man who says he does not believe in a real right and wrong, you will find the same man going back on this a moment later. He may break his promise to you, but if you try breaking one to him, he will be complaining, "It's not fair," before you can say Jack Robinson. A nation may say treaties don't matter, but then the next minute, they spoil their case by saying that the particular treaty that they want to break is an unfair one. But if treaties do not matter, and if there is no such thing as right and wrong, in other words, if there is no law of nature, what is the difference between a fair treaty and an unfair one? Have they not let the cat out of the bag and shown that whatever they say, they really know the law of nature just like anyone else? It seems then we are forced to believe in a real right and wrong. People may be sometimes mistaken about them, just as people sometimes get their sums wrong, but they are not a matter of mere taste and opinion any more than the multiplication table. Now, if we are agreed about that, I go on to my next point, which is this. None of us are really keeping the law of nature. If there are any exceptions among you, I apologize to them. They had much better read some other book, for nothing I am going to say concerns them. And now, turning to the ordinary human beings who are left.
So Lewis's first point is that we all have this shared idea about what is right and what is wrong, and we have a choice whether we obey this law of nature or not. And in this last paragraph, we have his second point, that we frequently choose to not obey it. He's being ironic at the end. There are no exceptions. No human being really keeps the law of nature. We don't do what we expect other people to do.
I hope you will not misunderstand what I am going to say. I am not preaching, and heaven knows I do not pretend to be better than anyone else. I am only trying to call attention to the fact that this year, or this month, or more likely this very day, we have failed to practice ourselves the kind of behavior we expect from other people. There may be all sorts of excuses for us. That time you were so unfair to the children was when you were very tired. That slightly shady business about the money, the one you have almost forgotten, came when you were very hard up. And what you promised to do for old so-and-so and have never done, well, you never would have promised if you had known how frightfully busy you were going to be. And as for your behavior to your wife, or husband, or sister, or brother, if I knew how irritating they could be, I would not wonder at it. And who the dickens am I anyway? I am just the same. That is to say, I do not succeed in keeping the law of nature very well. And the moment anyone tells me that I am not keeping it, there starts up in my mind a string of excuses as long as your arm. The question at the moment is not whether they are good excuses. The point is that they are one more proof of how deeply, whether we like it or not, we believe in the law of nature. If we do not believe in decent behavior, why should we be so anxious to make excuses for not having behaved decently? The truth is, we believe in decency so much, we feel the rule of law pressing on us so, that we cannot bear to face the fact that we are breaking it, and consequently we try to shift the responsibility. For you notice that it is only for our bad behavior that we find all these explanations. It is only our bad temper that we put down to being tired or worried or hungry. We put our good temper down to ourselves. These then are the 2 points I want to make. First, that human beings all over the earth have this curious idea that they ought to behave in a certain way, and cannot really get rid of it. Secondly, that they do not in fact behave in that way. They know the law of nature, they break it. These 2 facts are the foundation of all clear thinking about ourselves and the universe we live in.
Well, this point lands even more sharply today than it might have in Lewis's day. We still appeal to a moral law that we didn't create, a law that we hold other people to, but fail to keep ourselves. And that's exactly where he's headed through this book, toward the gap between the law that we know and the lives we actually live, and the implications of that. If you like this content, please subscribe. Thank you, and we'll see you in Chapter 2.